Okay, hello, Lindsay Turnbull. Welcome to the Times interview. Um,
Hi,
Lovely to
Jonathan. Yeah, it's very nice to be here.
super. And yeah, can you just give us an introduction to you, please?
Yeah, so my name's Lindsay Turnbull. I'm Professor of Plant Ecology at the University of Oxford, and I'm a tutor there as well. So Oxford's a strange place in many ways, but one of its most strange features is that it has a central university, but also colleges. So I'm at a college called the Queen's College, and that means that that's where all the undergraduates are based. So being a tutor in a college means being responsible for biology students in your college, and it means providing tutorials and also some academic guidance. And that's a role I really enjoy, actually. It's a real privilege to have that close contact with young people who are coming in to study biology, and they're always really enthusiastic, and that's a really fun job. And then I'm also based in the department, and in Oxford, we've just merged our Department of Plant Sciences and our Department of Zoology into a brand new Department of Biology. And very soon, we're going to be moving into a fancy new building, which is going up at the moment in Oxford. So it's exciting times.
Lovely, lovely. So, tell me, when and how did you first get interested in plants?
So I do remember being very interested in plants as a child. So I got interested in natural history and in organisms generally as a child. And I can remember being bought a book by my parents called The Spotter's Guide to Wildlife because I was very interested in wildlife. And I can remember taking that book out and identifying a plant growing in the cracks in the pavement outside my house, which turned out to be this thing called Herb Roberts, which I'm sure everybody knows. It's an extremely common weedy plant, if you like. But I thought it was just a very beautiful plant, and I was super excited that this kind of weed actually had a name and was a proper thing. And I think that was really important to me in realizing that everything out there, is a proper thing with a proper name. And that if you are armed with a book, you can find out that name. I'm sure I didn't identify all things correctly. I've still got that book, and the illustrations aren't that great. But I'm pretty confident that it was Herb Roberts. And I used to go to a little patch of woodland near my house where there were bluebells, marsh marigolds, wood sorrel, wood anemones. Those are really important plants for me. They recall my childhood very strongly. So yeah, I have had a long-standing interest in plants. I was never someone who was interested in animals but never noticed plants. I mean, that's what's nice about plants. They are much more accessible. If you're a child or a young person going out into the environment, you're going to struggle to find many mammals, right? But you can find loads of plants.
Absolutely, plants are always there and always around. That's fantastic. Yeah, not dissimilar from my own background. Actually, very early on, I'm trying. I mean, actually, you've just mentioned that. I'm trying to remember what was the first book. It probably was the Observer's book of wildflowers, but also the tea cards. I don't have those now, but you used to get in a packet of tea when I were a lad, a card, and it could be football, it could be whatever, aeroplanes, but certainly animals, plants, and then you'd get a poster you could stick them all on, or stick them in the book. That's right. Anyway, so that's super. Lovely. I'm going to just ask you another one, just about then. Okay, so you had that early interest, and then how did that go into your education at school and university?
So I think at school I don't remember being taken out much at all, or learning a lot more in the classrooms. It was always just a passion of mine on the side, and I joined the WWF and got their fact sheets and all the rest. But it was something that was very driven by my own interest. And then obviously when I was a bit of an older teenager, I sort of lost interest in that again a bit. And then when I went to university at Cambridge, I can remember being shocked going on a field course and that I knew most of at least the common stuff. I knew what it all was. And that the vast majority of other students knew nothing. They couldn't even identify an oak tree or a beech tree or a primrose. And that is absolutely still the case now. I take my students out and I can point at things and I'm pretty damn confident that none of them will know what they are. And I literally can point at a violet and they'll say, is that a bluebell? I mean, I find the lack of knowledge of just fundamental natural history quite extraordinary. Because I have to say, I thought I was reasonably cool at Cambridge compared to some of the other Natskis. as we were,
Yeah, yeah.
university able. But then I had the shock of realising that no, I was actually the most uncool person because I knew the name of all these plants and none of them did.
Wonderful.
So yeah, I find that really quite incredible that even people who are studying biology, and many of them actually know nothing about the things outside their door.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can identify with that, and yeah, but it's worrying. It's worrying, which is why my role. I like my role, which is teaching plant identification, mainly at master's level, UK plants. But I am starting a new module or leading a new module on field ecology next year for undergrads. So it'll be nice to give them. And we've got a new module coming in part two, second years as well, which will include some field botany. As you say, biology programs must have a plant element. And I do think, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, I actually find it really grounding to be able to name things. It's about like knowing the people around you, even if they're not your best friends, knowing who they are, knowing who the plants are around you. To me, I think it gives a sort of satisfaction. I can, oh, but also a grounding in your environment, rather than they're just things that are there.
Yeah, I think it's hugely important. And I think they recognise that too. If you go out, I just take them out for a walk. My own students in the spring normally. There's lots of lovely places that you can get to very easily in Oxford. There's a great variety of things on
Sure.
that are there to be seen, and I know what they all are. And I mean,
Yeah,
do not consider myself in any way to be an expert botanist, but you don't need to be an expert botanist to know the names of common things.
you
And
don't.
I think students would like to have that knowledge. It is something that they suddenly, you almost think, oh, suddenly they've got some respect for me, right? Because I can tell them the names of these things.
It does bring
And
respect, yes.
yeah,
But it,
so they don't, it's not that they don't value that knowledge. They do, I think. But I think they've just not ever realised that they could gain that knowledge, or they haven't had anybody who could show them. Obviously, I didn't really
absolutely.
have that either. I did that. I learned a lot of
Yeah,
those things for myself,
yeah,
but
me too.
that was maybe, I don't know, that's obviously not that common. And my mum was always a keen gardener, so at least she knew the
Oh,
names of the
yeah,
garden plants. So I knew that garden plants had names. So maybe it
yes.
was easier for me. I mean, I think if you didn't even have anyone in your house who was interested in anything out, then that would perhaps just that barrier is just too high. I
Yes.
don't know.
Yeah, I think family and members, friends, and that are helpful. It's the same, I imagine, with sort of bird knowledge, bird identification. If you've got somebody, a kind of mentor who could be family or could be friend, that makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
My parents were both gardeners. My mum's dad, actually, who I never knew, was a proper gardener in some big house in Hertfordshire, I think, and I'm pretty sure it's in my genes. I was just going to ask you, just again off track here, because I did a PhD at Cambridge. Who were your tutors there, just in case I knew?
Well, so I remember Peter Grubb very
Yeah,
well.
he was
I
my
mean, he
PhD
wasn't sort of,
supervisor.
yeah, I wasn't in his college. So it's a bit of a different system at Cambridge where they don't have a kind of, Oxford's different in that you have a tutor in your subject in your college and they will teach you quite a lot and you will have quite a relationship with them.
Mm,
Whereas in Cambridge, they have a director of studies in a college who just does a bit of organising, who does sort of admin for you. So you don't have a relationship with them. But Peter, I remember vividly having tutorials with Peter because, I was really interested in plants and ecology. And so I had some tutorials with him in third year, I think. And I
mm.
remember were really amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, he's great. Great
It
chap.
was like having tutorials with God.
It's a bit like that.
Ordinary
Yeah,
white beard and everything.
it's absolutely wonderful. Lovely. So I think that takes us nicely on to the next question, which is how do you see the relationship between people and plants in the 21st century?
Well, I mean, what we've just said, right? Most people, I don't think, do have any real understanding of plants. I think people understand trees much better, right? People seem to connect to trees much better than they do to
Yeah.
other kinds of plants. And people, we've seen over the last few years incredible levels of public anger and outrage and upsetness, if that's not quite the right verb, when trees have been cut down, right? I think people feel that a tree is really a living individual that they can have this strange kind of identity with, and that if they're cut down, they feel, angry and upset about that. So I think there is that shows that people are able to see plants as real living things that do require respect and nurturing and shouldn't be, just treated like objects. So I think that's sort of hopeful. But I suspect that, beyond that, in other ways, you also see things that indicate that people just don't really understand, right? So if you're replacing some kind of grassland with another kind of grassland, I don't think most people would really be able to tell that difference. So I think it's going to be a slow and steady game, right? I think as the environmental crisis bites ever deeper, people are starting to increase their awareness of why these kinds of ecosystems are important, why a species-rich grassland matters. I think we just have to hope, really, right, that relationship gets better and people stop seeing this just sort of blank green canvas, and that maybe building on that relationship with trees might be a good starting point.
Yeah. Do you think there's any material difference between the relationship between people and plants if we take, say, the northern and the southern hemispheres? Have you got experience of I haven't, but have you got experience of working in the southern hemisphere
I've
with
got
people and
experience
plants?
of working in Seychelles, and they are much more nature conscious than people in Britain. And the respect for nature and information about nature is very much embedded in their schools, much more than it is in
Lovely.
ours. Now, I'm not sure whether that is partly because they are living closer to nature. A lot of people fish, and that's still an important source of food for people, is their own subsistence fishing. Their natural environment is incredibly beautiful, and I'm not really sure, but I think there is a much greater kind of respect for nature in general. I think we don't really have that here, or not in a really visceral way, right? People might tell you, "Oh yes, of course we should have respect for nature" in a kind of interview setting, but then they're quite happy to go out and start spraying glyphosate around or something. So I don't think it really matches up with what they say.
Okay, thanks. So let's talk a little bit about you and your research interests. Tell us a bit about what motivates you and what you do in terms of your research.
Yeah, so I'm a plant ecologist by training, and my PhD and my subsequent research was all about plant coexistence. So why is it that we can have large numbers of plant species coexisting, for example, in a species-rich grassland? So I've worked in chalk grasslands and limestone grasslands. And I think that's still a question that we just don't understand, why there are 40 plant species in a square metre in a chalk grassland. I mean, we know it's something to do with the very low nutrient status of those grasslands. We know that we can destroy that diversity quite easily through fertilising, but that doesn't really answer the question of how are they coexisting when the nutrient status is low. And I think that's still a very intractable problem. And so for that reason, I don't really work on it anymore. It just seemed like that's just a question I don't think we're really going to be able to answer, or we don't have the tools currently to be able to really answer that question.
Okay.
So more recently, I've been involved in some conservation work. So the Ridgeway National Trail runs through Oxfordshire, Berkshire, Wiltshire, and is a long distance national trail. So it's a very beautiful walking experience, actually, and it has quite a lot of grassland associated with the verges on the trail. It's a very ancient trail, and it used to be a drover's way, so it would have gone through acres and acres of chalk grassland, but most of it's now been ploughed up for arable. But the verges are still potentially could be very nice, but they're not being managed, so they have just lost diversity. And so I started a project about 5 years ago to look to see how easy it would be to restore those verges.
Mm-hmm.
So we just did some simple management treatments, just a set of plots, very simple kind of classic plant ecology type experiment, plots with various management treatments applied at the plot level, and then consulting with the Oxford Herbarium to find out what species were definitely present in the past, and then sowing them back into half of each plot. And what we learned from that is that the chalk grassland in those verges could quite easily be restored. In fact, it was amazing after sort of last summer, 5 years on from an initial sowing and then managing every year through various cutting treatments, that you could restore fabulous species-rich chalk grassland in just 5 years from what was pretty much just a monoculture of Arenatherum. So, yeah, whether that can be rolled out on a larger scale, I'm not quite sure. It's always very difficult to get the funding for these kinds of things. You know, payments from DEFRA are very closely tied to very particular initiatives, and that doesn't involve the management of the verges of national trails, for example. You know, that's something I think would be a great idea if we could make these national trails are just there for public access. It's typical. There's never any biodiversity imperative as part of that. It's the same with the national parks, right? It's all about giving people access to fresh air and exercise. It's not about giving people access to nature. So that really needs to change, right? Because if we could manage the national trails for their biodiversity as well, if that was part of the mandate of them, then I think they could serve a really useful and important role as connective elements in our landscape. So that's another thing. And I don't do quite so much plant work anymore. I told you I have a connection in Seychelles, and I've started working on corals, partly because corals are kind of a bit like plants in some ways. And also there's just such a crisis in coral reefs, which I won't talk about in any detail, but I think there is a kind of imperative to try to do more work there, because the clock is ticking so hard on the future of coral reefs.
What's fascinating is that we have very similar interests. My PhD was with Peter Grubb on chalk grasslands. I was particularly interested in a question that Alex Watt wrote out about, which was why some species seem to be always more abundant than others. So it wasn't exactly the coexistence issue. It was more, why is it that Salad Burnett is always more abundant than, Burnett saxifrage. So I also work in the Czech Republic with a colleague, and she is really moving the restoration of meadow, particularly meadow, species-rich meadows in the Carpathian Mountains, and it often you talk about the need for, and I totally agree with the sort of biodiversity element being in the national parks and trails and so on, but it often boils down to people. The people that can motivate these programs. And she's certainly one of them, and you kind of wonder what happens when she retires, because you need these people to spearhead, to have the passion and the ability to motivate programs. So I mean there are some grassland. There's a Wheeled Meadows initiative, isn't there? Which I used to work at Y College, and one of my previous students there ran that, where they're doing a lot of restoration in using brush harvested seed and so on. Because we are in the UN decade of ecological restoration, aren't we? So it will be nice to be able to use that as a motivator to get some decent funding for the kinds of things you're talking about. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. You have a book out recently, Biology: The Whole Story. So, Lindsay, tell us a little bit about that book, maybe the background, what its aim is, the audience, and so on.
Yeah, so I wanted to write the book because, obviously, as I said, I teach in a college in Oxford, and I have these students coming up from school starting this very general biology degree. And one of the things I notice is that they often lack a big picture of biology, and the A-level is it's strange, right? The curriculum of the A-level is strange, it's very human-focused, it's got quite a lot of molecular biology in it, but the organism is totally missing. So there's nothing about any organism other than humans, really. And it's also just highly fragmented, and they have to learn a lot by rote, and they have to spend a lot of time basically getting inside the head of an exam board. My son's just done A-levels, and I've seen what it's about. It's masses of poring over past papers, working out when they ask a question like this is the kind of answer you have to give. It's an enormous amount of the time of children at school is spent doing that. And I can't think of a worse use of anybody's time than doing that, So I feel like if they're asked to write an essay, they're good at the detail, but they're not good at the big picture. So I wanted to try to write a book that would provide that big picture of biology. What's it all about? It's not a massive series of unrelated facts. It actually is. There is a conceptual framework there that can take you all the way from genes to ecology. and what that would look like, and also write it in a way that was actually enjoyable to read.
Mm.
Because a lot of textbooks are incredibly dry, and that's part of the problem when you're trying to atomize. You sort of go the GCSE bite-sized route, which has kind of been applied to academic subjects in school. Then it's all about just breaking it down into the minimum size chunks that you can then memorize and regurgitate. And again, then you've taken all the joy out of it. So that this is my attempt to provide a kind of readable treatment of the whole of biology, that's kind of a bit more light-hearted. And it doesn't have to be a sort of big heavyweight thing, right? And I think I never approached biology like that. And I think this is what a lot of the anxiety that students are facing as well. I mean, if you want to be anxious about a subject, then do it like that, right? That if you can't get the exact nuance, if you can't get inside the head of the exam board, then you're lost. If you say photosynthesis when they don't want that precise word, then you won't get the mark. And have to spend a whole year saying, look, you could write completely different essays and they could both get brilliant marks. Right? You're not trying to get inside my head or anyone else's head here. You just write what you think is a good answer to this question. And if we agree, oh yeah, well, that's not what I would have written, but actually this is great, then you will be rewarded for that. And that is absolutely alien to them, because it's just not what school is anymore, sadly.
So thank you very much, Lindsay. That takes us definitely into the next question, which is how can we encourage the next generation of students that are plant-aware students?
Well, what I've seen about creating plant-aware students is you've got to get them out there. You've got to do it in the field. You've got to get people out there looking at plants, and then learning their names, and then maybe bringing them back, and then putting them under the microscope. And so I teach on field courses. We have a first year compulsory field course on ecology, and we have a day on plants. Myself and Stephen Harris were running that last year. Stephen Harris is the head of our herbarium, and he's a real proper botanist. But taking them out into the field, getting them to look at plants, start identifying, start looking at them properly, and seeing that they aren't all the same, how they're different, and then bringing them back and seeing the details of flowers under a really good quality microscope. And actually, most of them are really into it. And we don't have any problem getting them excited about it. I mean, they might not be quite as excited on our day as they are on the Rocky Shore day, where they can find really cool nudibranchs and things. But, they do actually really like it. The other thing I did was a little kind of practical on the arum maculatum. That's like a really great thing that you can find really easily in Britain. Yeah. And it has kind of quite mad biology, sort of heating up and stinking and trapping insects and then releasing them again. So I think it's about finding those kinds of things. And I don't think the problem isn't plants, right? They are interesting. You just need to get kids out there, or students out there, to engage with them directly. And you need to have your store of great stories and people who can tell those stories.
Yeah, I so absolutely agree with that. There's a lot of agreement going on here. I mean, so I can remember in the past, colleagues, particularly maybe colleagues more on the zoological side, saying students won't be interested in plants, they'll be bored. And you're absolutely right, they won't. If you take them out and you show them the things, you get them, and just being outside, of course, we know is very therapeutic, but being out in a grassland or woodland, getting down on the ground, looking at these things, feeling, oh, actually, yes, I think I can work out what that is, and then thinking about it as a role in the ecosystem or the vegetation or whatever. Yeah, so absolutely, and that's what we just need to be making sure that there are as many of the institutions that teach biology or indeed geography or related, and indeed maybe other non-science subjects, because the arts is plants sit well within the arts. I think that's important, and that's of course where we move on to the next question, because Botanical University Challenge has an aim to help connect students who have an interest in plants, if it's small numbers at different institutions, and we had 25 different universities and other institutions involved in the 2023 competition for 2024. We hope that we equal and hopefully exceed that, and we're delighted that you're involved in the finals in August 2024. So Lindsay, tell me, what are you looking forward to in Botanical University Challenge?
Well, I'm really looking forward to the finals, so to have this 2 or 3 days where the teams will be coming to Oxford. And I've been working with the Botanic Gardens to organise the hosting of that. So it's going to be hosted in the Queen's College and the Botanic Gardens jointly. So students who come will be staying in the college, and we'll be having our final in our Shulman Auditorium. So I think it's going to be a fantastic few days, and we're trying to organise lots of really interesting events so that not only the actual competition, but also the students coming will have a chance to learn more and get out there and work with some of our experts. For example, we're going to work with Stephen Harris to have a look at flowers in more detail and put them under the microscope and see how incredibly gorgeous they are, and go to the Arboretum perhaps and the gardens themselves. So I think it is going to be a really great few days, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I've no doubt you'll be inspired, because we had our first festival last year in Nottingham. And just to see the students from all these different places coming together, because we cover UK and Ireland, so we have Irish teams in as well, so in that sense we're international, and just seeing these students together, the networking that they do together, as well as with the professional botanists, ecologists and so on who are there, it's really inspiring from both sides, and the fact that we can run it over effectively 3 days, or the best part of 3 days, in Oxford in August 2024 is just so exciting, and yeah, we're all really looking forward to it, and we're really looking forward to your involvement as well. So thanks a lot. And that brings us to a final question. Now, I don't usually like talking about favourites in any respect. I think there are so many plants of all different kinds. So to ask about a favourite is well, why not? What is your favourite plant, or a plant for which the story, and you talked about the importance of stories, the story inspired you?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, because often when you go to the hairdresser, and I used to actually tell people I work with plants, and then stop saying that, because that's all they'd ask you, what's your favourite plant? And then you'd be like, oh, yeah, I mean, of course, I don't really have a favourite, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the Coco de Mer, because I said I have this connection with Seychelles. And the organisation I'm connected to is the Seychelles Islands Foundation. And they manage 2 World Heritage sites in Seychelles. And one of them is called the Vallée de Mai. And that is the stronghold for the Coco de Mer. And the Coco de Mer is an incredible relative of the common coconut that's endemic to Seychelles. And in fact, I think originally it was on 2 islands. Now it's confined to 1. And it's been much less successful than the common coconut, because it produces a nut which is the world's heaviest seed. It's this immense double coconut, and it's much heavier than water. So unlike coconuts that float and can go all over the world and conquer the world, the Coco de Mer just sinks to the bottom of the ocean, and so has been spectacularly unsuccessful in spreading itself around. But these incredible nuts used to wash up on the coast of East Africa or in the Maldives, and people would prize them incredibly, because you can then sort of carve them, and even once they've been travelling under the ocean, they retain this structure, almost like ebony, and so they were incredibly valuable. And because people had no idea where they came from, they're called Coco de Mer, because they thought that there must be coconuts growing at the bottom of the ocean, which obviously is not what they were doing. So this incredible, huge nut comes from these beautiful palm trees. They have immense leaves. The forest is very beautiful, very still, very quiet, and just has a small number of weird associated endemic animals. The nuts are then can feed the growing tree for several years. They can draw resources from the nut, and it's supposed to be an adaptation to these extremely phosphorus poor soils. So the idea being that it's sort of competition gone mad. If you don't provision your offspring with an enormous store of phosphorus, then there's no way that they can get the resources they need to get up to the canopy and produce a big enough root system that they can start extracting nutrients for themselves. So yeah, they have to, when the nuts are on the tree, you have to be careful not to walk under the tree. People have been killed by them falling on their heads. And there was another, and the male, so they have male and female trees. So these are the female nuts, and the males produce these extraordinary phallic structures that have these little yellow flowers. And when the first sort of European, I can't remember his name now, discovered this forest, he thought it was the Garden of Eden. Because the nuts look a bit like a woman's bottom, or some people think that anyway, and the male flowers are incredibly phallic. So we thought, this must be the Garden of Eden. This is it. I found it. So it's like such a kind of crazy thing, and it's a really iconic tree in Seychelles. Everybody knows about it. People, have them in their gardens as well now, and they're in botanic gardens all over the world. But the actual forest is at a really incredible place, and if anybody's going to Seychelles, definitely worth a visit.
That's wonderful. That's a wonderful, wonderful story. I've so enjoyed talking with you, Lindsay, and really looking forward to meeting you at Botanical University Challenge in Oxford in August. So thank you. Thank you very much.
It's great to talk to you too. Thank you.